I'm Jim Bergeron, pastor at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Houston, Texas, and this is the sermon for the 19th Sunday after Pentecost in the A series, based on Matthew 21:33 through 46. A very important meeting was convened by three top world leaders to plan the future of the world: President Putin, Chairman Xi Jinping, and Mr. Bill Gates. During the meeting, an asteroid hit the conference room. All three arrived at the pearly gates at the same time. The Almighty was there on his throne to interview them. President Putin, what do you believe in? I believe in uniting Western Asia, Europe, and all the Slavic countries under the Russian flag for worldwide peace and prosperity. Very nice intentions, Vladimir. Come sit by me so we can discuss this further. And you, Chairman Xi, what do you believe in? I believe in controlling all the planet's oceans, waterways, and ports to ensure fair trade, economic prosperity, and peace throughout the whole world. Very admirable intention, Xi. Come and sit by me so we can develop a plan. And you, Mr. Bill Gates, what do you believe? I believe, Gates replies, you are sitting in my chair. George Harrison of the Beatles wrote about the deceptions of personal possessive pronouns. I, me, mine. There's a tendency to believe and act as if the world around us is our personal possession. It's close to me, it's mine, my ideas, my religion, my possessions, my people, my spouse, my children, my territory, myself. Jesus tells a story about whose vineyard it really is. Whose vineyard is it? God's, of course. Forgetting that invites disaster. Vineyard in the parable does not belong to the stewards, its trustees. If the tenants, the trustees, become proprietary about the vineyard, they will have failed in their stewardship mission. Sometimes we reject our status as beloved and valued trustees of God's world, and we begin to think of ourselves as outright owners, and in so doing, position ourselves as equal to God. The authorities who face Jesus and hear this story assume that judgment is an event that's a long way off in the unforeseeable future and not really an incentive toward accountability. When it finally comes, they assume that the Messiah will set right all the things they perceive as unfair, unjust, unavenged. The Messiah will intervene, punch the bad guys in the nose, and by executive order command utopia to happen. Because this is not Jesus' political platform. He is automatically aggravating the authorities into getting rid of him. They weren't expecting Jesus. They didn't see him coming. After all, he was born in a barn. God has sent many messengers. They weren't recognized. God sent Isaiah, naked and barefoot, for 3 years as a warning judgment. Isaiah 19 and 20. He's the first recorded streaker, after Adam and Eve, of course, who didn't even know what streaking was until they ate the fruit. But God doesn't give up on us, even when we don't recognize his servant messengers. The allegorical point of Jesus' parable stresses this. Galilee in the first century felt much resentment against absentee ownership, and this incident probably played out fairly often in real time, except for one difference. No landowner would be dumb enough to send 3 consecutive delegations, including a son, to be beaten and killed by unfaithful stewards. Any normal landlord, after the failure of the first servant to return home in peace, would send his militia, get his vineyard under control, and use the faithless tenants for fertilizer. How nice that God's merciful doesn't work that way. He has this marvelous history of keeping on, trying with us, even though we block his efforts. He sends messengers, Our job is to recognize them and take to heart their message, no matter how different they may seem. It is His vineyard. God is in charge. He has us covered. The rulers of the Jews made the error so common in administrators of states, and churches, and families, of admiring too much their own authority and system, losing touch with the great living source of all authority. Whose vineyard is it? This is how you hear the parable as a prolonged, privileged political administrator. And now here's how you hear it as a peasant with fond hopes for revolution and freedom from Roman rule. Shift gears with me. The only absentee landowners of this time in Israel were the Roman senators, who foreclosed on and bought up ranch-sized acreages of land for pennies. This was easily accomplished in collaboration with the temple rulers. It was a plantation system of agriculture. Grain crops were stripped out, and vineyards and orchards were cultivated instead for a higher profit margin that benefited mostly the Italian peninsula and not the Holy Land. Jesus describes a huge estate. It requires its own wine press and a watchtower. It's completely surrounded by a protective wall. Imagine a wall the size of around the King Ranch. The mistake that's going to cost this landowner is that he hires back the people that he stole the land from in the first place to now work it as slaves. Now they're working harder, not seeing any profit. They and their families are starving. There's no unions, and the owner doesn't care about anything other than the profit from the grapes. He lives 400 miles away, 40 days travel, and he owns other people to do his collections. So the tenants, wage slaves, assault and kill the landowner's representatives. And good for them. Whose land is it really anyway? They're now successful revolutionaries reclaiming their holdings. The owner can't make the trip, so he sends a second wave of representatives to collect. They're also killed and assaulted by the tenants. Yippee! Now the tide is turning our way in the revolution against the cruel establishment coalition of Rome and Jerusalem. So now the landowner sends his son. Clearly, this dumb Roman senator does not understand the depths of antipathy and hatred toward him. He might be a nice guy. He might even pay his stewards well. But the point is getting the occupied land back. Whose vineyard is it anyway? The tenants really aren't counting on being in the will if the landowner were to die. They're counting on taking their own land back from the hated master by killing his son. And they will be heroes for doing it. So Jesus asks, what happens next? You finish the story for me. The leaders of the temple are hearing this story on different levels. Rome is a threat to them. If they could pull it off, ousting Rome from the Holy Land would be great. However, they're in a bind. In a material sense, their collaboration with Rome, with tribute and temple taxes, makes them no better than the absentee Roman landholders. They're on the same team. In a spiritual sense, they've rejected the clear-thinking prophets and hamstrung the Spirit of God, whose vineyard, Israel, the whole world, really is. They aren't actually looking for Messiah. They feel that it's their vineyard, begrudgingly shared in a dubious partnership with the Roman Empire. The question is, what happens next? They can only speak and answer on a variety of levels also, and that fact judges them. Well, the senator landowner, at the public expense of taxation, will hire a fighting force to come back and take the disputed land, and we will be paying the hated Romans good tax money to come back and kill us again and steal our land a second time. And Jesus says, yeah, right. And more poor people will be hired as tenants. This time they'll work for even less and comply. with this fresh negative example of a rebellion destroyed. The subtext, the meta message to the Jewish religious authority from Jesus becomes, what right have you to incite rebellion to poor innocent folks who have lost everything already? They're dying while you're still prospering in your collaboration with the enemy. If you don't produce taxes, tribute, the Romans will crush you and your temple and your economy too. And you're sitting there thinking politics and leverage. They're thinking power and expedience. You are naive cultural moralists, a small snack in the voracious mouth of an amoral Roman legion. Why the anti-Rome rhetoric at home and pro-Rome behavior when the senators are in town? How are you any better than the Romans in your shabby administration of God's world? Problem is, we act like owners when we're tenants. We forget we're stewards of God's unbelievable abundance. There's plenty. Remember whose vineyard it is. God gives us the management of his vast estate, which includes our own very personal selves. It all belongs to God. His name is on the deed of creation. God's VIN number is on your soul. He provides abundantly and asks for a small portion to recognize his ownership. Golgotha's site of the crucifixion looked like a skull because it was a rejected quarry. The limestone was too soft to build. The place of the skull and the cross became the cornerstones for hope and salvation. The cornerstone serves double duty. It is strong and sound enough to serve as a binder between two walls. Christ as cornerstone joins walls, the walls of Judaism and Christianity, the walls of sacred and secular, the walls of Rome and Jerusalem, the walls of science and art, the walls, all of which protect God's vineyard created for us. It's a garden. What we build, thinking that it is our vineyard only, without Christ the cornerstone, will buckle under the strain of poverty, injustice, and violence. What we as a world community built in the First World War to make the world safe for democracy succeeded in 2 decades at making it tolerably safe for dictatorship. It's risky to forget whose vineyard it all really is. Thomas Jefferson said, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when reflecting that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever." On a personal level, when we build relationships, if Christ is our cornerstone, the relationships will be everlasting. We are servants, stewards, and sturdy because of the stone. We stand solid, working and enjoying God's vineyard. Amen.